The first time I saw my own body was on a Tuesday morning. I remember because the forest was wrapped in a strange kind of silence, one that felt expectant, like the pause before a confession. My name's Caleb Ward, and for 23 years I've worked as a ranger in the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest, up in Washington State. I've seen things out here that most people wouldn't believe. Avalanches swallowing cabins, rivers turning gray with ash after wildfires, animals dying in perfect circles with no sign of struggle. But nothing, not even the wildest day on duty, prepared me for the week when I began to doubt the line between my shift and my own shadow. The forest teaches you things, whether you want to learn them or not. Patience, fear, the meaning of silence. You start to understand that everything in these woods listens, even when you think you're alone. The first lesson I ever learned was that the forest remembers. You can't bury something here without it pushing back through the soil eventually. Maybe that's why I stayed after so many others transferred or quit. I wanted to believe that the forest could be understood, that if you respected it enough, it would respect you back. That illusion lasted until last winter when I found footprints leading out of a sealed cave. That morning, I'd been called in to investigate reports of echoing voices in the Icicle Creek area. Hikers said they'd heard what sounded like someone shouting for help over and over, but the voice never moved. It just repeated itself from deep within the ridge. Normally, I'd write it off as sound bouncing through the canyons. That place could make a squirrel sneeze sound like a person drowning. But the calls kept coming every day at the same time, dawn and dusk. A pattern like that in nature always means something. The snow was soft enough that morning that every step whispered. My radio buzzed once, faint static, and then cut out. The pines above me were bowed with frost, creaking under their own weight, and under all of it, I could hear something, faint, rhythmic. A voice? No, it was softer than that, like breathing, caught in stone. When I reached the cave entrance, my stomach twisted. I'd been here before. This section had been sealed off years ago after a rock slide killed a volunteer climber. We'd logged it, fenced it, and left it alone. Yet now the rocks were pulled aside, stacked neatly as if someone or something had unsealed it from within. And right there, in the snow leading away from the cave, were footprints, human, barefoot. They went for nearly 30 yards before vanishing at the tree line. The strange part? They were mine. The left foot, with the old scar across the arch, the right one slightly turned out, the same stride, the same weight. You tell yourself it's a coincidence, maybe a trick of erosion, maybe some drunk hiker. I tried to believe that. But then the smell hit me, like wet stone and rot, something animal but wrong, as if the earth itself had opened a wound. The air in the cave exhaled when I got close. It felt alive, like the cave wasn't hollow but breathing. I radioed it in, no response. The static wasn't even static anymore. It was rhythm, like slow breathing through the speaker. I took one step inside. My flashlight hit the wall and I froze. The stone was slick with something dark, not blood, but something thicker. My own boot prints led ahead of me, deeper into the dark. Every instinct screamed to back out, to call for backup. But duty and curiosity are twins. They drag you places you shouldn't go. About 20 feet in, I heard the voice. It wasn't calling for help anymore. It was humming. The same tune my mother used to hum when I was a kid, when I'd wake up from nightmares about getting lost in the woods. I felt my throat close. The air was colder here, and every exhale hung longer than it should have, like the cold wasn't leaving my lungs. I told myself it was just the acoustics, that caves play tricks. Then my flashlight caught something that made my knees buckle, a ranger's uniform, mine, torn, soaked, lying across a shape on the ground. The tag on the jacket read, Ward. I crouched down and touched the sleeve. It was damp, cold, and clinging to something underneath, something solid. My flashlight trembled as I angled it toward the face. It was me. Not just similar, exact. The same scar on my eyebrow from the ATV crash 10 years ago. The same mole on my neck. Even the same ranger patch with the same frayed corner I kept meaning to fix. My heart started hammering so hard I thought it would echo off the stone. I stumbled backward, tripped over a rock, and my flashlight spun across the cave. For a second, I saw two shadows on the wall, both of them mine. When I scrambled out into the daylight, I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs felt like they'd tear apart. By the time I reached my truck, I was shaking so hard I dropped the keys twice. The engine coughed, then started, and I drove until the road curved into the ranger station. The first thing I did was check the mirror. My reflection stared back, muddy, pale, alive. I laughed, a dry, broken sound, and that's when I saw it. The same smear of dark residue across my sleeve that I'd touched in the cave. It shimmered faintly, like it was still wet. When I reported the incident, the chief told me to take a few days off. "You've been working too many doubles," he said. "It's the stress talking." Maybe he was right. Maybe exhaustion could make a man see his own corpse. But the cave didn't let go of me. Every night, I'd wake up thinking I heard my own voice calling from outside the cabin. And once, I swear I saw movement through the window, someone walking the perimeter, wearing my uniform, my hat. The next morning, I checked the snow around my cabin. 2 sets of prints circled it. Both were mine. That's when I started keeping a recorder with me, old habit from my early years. Sometimes sound catches what sight can't. I played it back one night, half hoping it would prove I was losing my mind. But what I heard wasn't me. It was breathing again close to the mic. Then, faintly, a whisper. "You came back." The forest was quiet after that. Too quiet. No bird calls, no squirrels, not even the distant rush of the creek. Just wind moving through the trees, slow and heavy like the forest was holding its breath. They sent another ranger to check the cave a week later. His name was Boyd. He didn't come back. Search and rescue found his radio on the path, but no sign of him. And the strange part, the snow had frozen over. But when they thawed it, the prints leading into the cave were mine again. The department sealed the area permanently after that. They told the press it was unstable terrain, but even from miles away, I swear I can feel that place at night. Sometimes when the wind hits just right, it sounds like my name being whispered from the ridges. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I feel the weight of the cave air pressing against my lungs. I thought I could leave it behind. But the forest doesn't forget. And I think whatever was buried in that cave wants me to remember. Sleep stopped feeling like rest after that week. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same thing. The cave breathing, the stone rising and falling like lungs beneath the earth, and my own body lying somewhere deep inside, face turned toward the dark. I'd wake drenched in sweat, certain I just felt something brush against me, like cold fingers testing whether I was still here. On the 8th night, I drove back out there. I told myself it was to prove the cave was closed, to silence the whispers in my head. But the truth was simpler. I had to see for myself that it was still sealed, that whatever I saw wasn't real. If I didn't, the idea would keep growing, like roots spreading through my thoughts until I couldn't tell where the forest ended and I began. The drive was long, winding through the dark timberline where the moonlight barely reached the road. The forest looked unfamiliar now, every shadow stretching too far, every tree turned slightly toward me as if listening. When I reached the ridge, I parked and sat with the engine off. The night hummed, wind through needles, something moving far off, steady and patient. I walked the rest of the way. The snow crunched under my boots, though each step sounded a little behind me, like someone following half a beat too late. My flashlight beam quivered as I approached the site. The fence they'd put up shimmered with frost. The warning signs were gone. Only a single yellow ribbon hung loose from the wire, fluttering in the wind like it wanted to point the way. The rocks had been moved again. Not all of them, just enough to make a gap a man could crawl through. I crouched, heart hammering, and shined the light inside. No breath, no movement, just that familiar, slick darkness. Something about the air inside didn't feel dead. It pulsed faintly, as though a current ran through it. I turned off the light and just listened. For a long time, all I heard was the slow beat of my pulse in my ears. Then came the echo, 3 knocks, evenly spaced, deep in the stone. I froze. "Boyd?" I said before I could stop myself. My voice came back doubled, the echo delayed, but not right. The repetition was slower, heavier, as if the cave was learning the sound of my voice and trying it on. That was enough. I backed out, turned, and saw something move between the trees behind me. A shape, tall, pale, blending with the snow. I couldn't make out its face. It stood there, motionless, just far enough that the light broke before reaching it. Then it tilted its head, like it was studying me. My instincts screamed to run, but I couldn't. I just stood there, flashlight trembling in my hand. It took one step forward. The snow beneath its foot didn't crunch. It didn't disturb a thing. The air around it seemed to warp slightly, like heat shimmer, but cold. When I blinked, it was gone. I sprinted back to the truck. The forest felt alive around me, branches groaning, snow falling in sheets, the wind whispering in short bursts that almost formed words. I locked the doors and started the engine, breathing hard. The headlights cut through the dark, and that's when I saw it in the reflection of the rearview mirror. Me. Standing behind the truck, face blank, one hand resting on the tailgate. I didn't turn around. I just drove. The engine roared, tires spinning through loose snow, and I kept my eyes on the road. By the time I reached the ranger station, dawn had smeared across the sky like a bruise. I parked crooked, stumbled inside, and sat until my shaking stopped. There's a protocol for psychological incidents on duty. File a report, undergo a wellness check, mandatory leave. I didn't file anything. Some things don't belong on paper. Instead, I burned my uniform that night, the same one I'd seen on the body in the cave. I thought maybe if I destroyed it, the image would fade. It didn't. 3 days later, the search team found Boyd's body. Or rather, they found two. One at the mouth of the cave, frozen, expression twisted mid-scream, and another 2 miles north, face down in the snow. Both had his badge. Both were missing his radio. The department called it a clerical error. Tad said one was an old training dummy from avalanche rescue. I've seen those dummies. They don't bleed. I asked to be transferred to a different sector, Lake Wenatchee, lower elevation, more patrols, more people. They granted it, but the forest here feels no different. Sometimes at night, I hear 3 knocks under the cabin floorboards. Sometimes I wake to find my boots wet, though I haven't been outside. Once I followed my own footprints out to the tree line. They led nowhere, just vanished in the middle of an open patch of snow, like I'd been lifted straight off the earth. People come to me with their stories. That's part of the job. The old trapper who swears he saw a figure running parallel to him through the pines, too tall to be human, too quiet to be an animal. The couple who claimed their campfire kept burning even after the snow buried it. The hikers who found themselves walking in circles though the compass never moved. You learn to listen without judgment. But lately when they speak, I feel something cold crawl up my spine because their stories sound like echoes of mine. One woman, maybe 60, came into the station last week. She said she'd been hiking near Icicle Ridge again, same area as the cave. She heard humming. A man's voice, low, familiar. When I asked her what tune it was, she hesitated, then hummed the same lullaby my mother used to sing. I nearly dropped my pen. She said she saw someone standing just beyond the tree line, a ranger. She waved, called out for help, but he didn't answer. Just smiled faintly, turned, and walked toward the ridge. I asked her what he looked like. Like you, she said. That night, I locked my cabin door and left the lights on. Every window showed a different reflection of me. Some turned slightly, some smiling faintly, one with eyes closed. When I blinked, they all faced forward again. I've stopped trying to explain it. The forest doesn't care about logic. It just waits. It listens. And when it finds someone who hears it back, it doesn't let go easily. There's an old belief among the locals. The mountain doesn't bury its dead. It remembers them. Some say the caves are its way of keeping what belongs to it. Maybe that's what happened to Boyd. Maybe that's what's happening to me. But sometimes when I'm patrolling alone and the trees start to whisper, I wonder if it's something worse, something that learned how to wear us. Because last night I found something pinned to my cabin door, a ranger badge. Mine. still warm to the touch. The badge was wedged under a splinter of wood, glinting faintly in the lantern light. My name was engraved into it, clean and fresh, as though it had been pressed just that morning. I reached out to touch it, half expecting it to crumble like something dug up from a grave. Instead, it was warm. Not from the lantern heat, warm like skin. I stepped back, pulse pounding. Someone had to be playing a sick joke. Maybe one of the other rangers found an old spare, maybe a prank, but that didn't explain the warmth, or the faint smell coming off it, like wet iron and pine sap, something I'd smelled before, deep inside that cave. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the cabin became a breath. Every flicker of the lamp became movement in the corner of my eye. Around 2 a.m., I heard the first knock, soft, measured, coming from under the floorboards. 3 knocks. The same rhythm I'd heard inside the cave. I told myself not to move, not to react, but the sound came again, a little louder. Knock, knock, knock. Then silence, and then from just outside the window, a faint voice. You're late for patrol. It was my own voice, the sound of my name being spoken by my own tone, the same cadence, the same gravel edge, did something to me. It's one thing to see your reflection acting strange. It's another to hear it alive outside your door. I grabbed my sidearm, heart pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my wrists, and opened the door. The cold air rushed in, thick and metallic. The forest was silent, too silent. The snow around the cabin was unbroken, smooth, except for one set of footprints leading toward the tree line. Mine. They weren't there when I went to bed. I followed them. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't stop myself. The beam of my flashlight trembled across the snow, following the prints as they wound between the trees. They led deeper into the forest where the moonlight could barely touch. Every few feet, I'd stop and listen, hearing the same whisper behind me, soft, breathless, my own voice repeating the same words. You came back. After a few minutes, the prints stopped. Dead end, just empty snow ahead. I turned slowly, feeling the forest pressing closer, and that's when I saw the light, faint, flickering, about 50 yards ahead. It looked like a lantern swinging between the trees. Boyd, I called. No answer. The light swayed once, twice, then started moving away from me. It wasn't until I followed that I realized something was wrong. Every time the light swung forward, it passed through trees, through solid trunks, as if the forest wasn't even there. When I finally reached the spot where it had been, I found something lying half buried in the snow. A tape recorder. My old one. The one I'd lost the night of the cave incident. It still worked. The red light flickered faintly when I pressed play. At first, all I heard was wind, then a man's breathing, steady, ragged, close to the mic. After a few seconds, my own voice spoke, hoarse and low. Don't follow the light. Then static. I dropped the recorder and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a root. The forest was utterly still, but the silence wasn't peace. It was pressure, like something waiting, watching. I didn't remember the drive back to the station. I must have been on autopilot, headlights cutting through the dawn haze. When I got there, I sat in the lot, engine idling, trying to convince myself to go inside and tell someone. But what would I even say? That I'd found another me in a cave, and now I was talking to myself through a recorder that had vanished a month ago? I chose silence, like every ranger before me who's seen something they can't explain. You learn to bury it under routine, logs, patrols, reports. You pretend the forest is just trees again, until it reminds you it isn't. 2 weeks later, a hiker went missing near Icicle Ridge again. His girlfriend came running to the station, sobbing, saying he'd wandered off after hearing a ranger call his name. Said the voice sounded friendly, exactly like mine. We organized a search party. I wasn't supposed to lead it, but no one knew that terrain better than me. I told them I'd take the south ridge while the others swept north. I didn't tell them that I could already hear that humming again in the back of my head. The forest grew stranger the deeper I went. No birds, no tracks. The trees stood too close together like ribs around a lung. The air was colder here, though there was no wind. I kept calling out the hiker's name, but each time I did, the echo came back with a delay. My own voice, repeating the name wrong like it was learning the words. When I reached the ridge, I found footprints again. Barefoot, human, leading right toward the same cave. The rocks had been moved again. There are moments in a man's life when his instincts split. Half of him wants to run, the other half needs to know. I stood there, torn between the two, the cave yawning before me like an open throat. I went in. The air inside was damp, and the smell hit me instantly. Wet stone, iron, something old. My flashlight flickered, the beam catching fragments of something on the walls. Carvings, human faces, etched crudely into the stone, dozens of them, all turned inward toward the dark. I recognized one. My own. My breath caught. I stumbled backward, the beam skittering over the ground, and then I saw it. Another body. The same uniform, the same face, lying in the same position as before. But the hands, God, the hands were fresh, warm. I could see the condensation of my breath rising above its chest as though it was breathing faintly, slow and shallow. And then its eyes opened. It looked at me. No words, no sound. Just a faint smile. A mirror of my own. I don't remember leaving the cave. One moment I was inside. The next I was running through the trees, tripping, clawing through snow, not daring to look behind me. My lungs burned, but my mind was blank. Pure instinct. Pure survival. When I finally reached the open ground again, I fell to my knees and vomited. The cold stung my skin like needles. I looked back once, just once, and saw the cave breathing again. Slow. Measured. Like the mountain itself was alive and remembering. I've been different since then. I see it in the mirror sometimes, something about the eyes. When I blink, the reflection takes a fraction longer. When I speak, the echo feels delayed, like it's waiting for permission to answer. The forest has been quiet for now, but the quiet doesn't feel like peace. It feels like the pause before the next step. And sometimes when the wind rolls down from the ridge, it carries a whisper, my own voice, calling for help. The days after that blurred together. Mornings that came too soon, nights that stretched too long. I couldn't tell anymore whether I was waking up or just continuing whatever dream I was trapped in. Each time I stepped outside, the forest seemed changed, like someone had rearranged it overnight. Trails curved differently, familiar landmarks vanished. The same path that led to the lookout tower one morning would loop me back to my cabin the next. My body felt wrong, too. My reflection in the mirror was pale, as if light bent differently against it. I'd find new scratches on my arms, pine needles in my bed, dirt under my nails. It was like parts of me were living elsewhere, doing things I couldn't remember. The other rangers noticed, or maybe they just didn't know how to say it. I caught one of them, young guy named Harris, staring at me a little too long during briefing. He looked pale when I asked what was wrong. "Nothing, sir," he said, voice too tight. "It's just, you were out on patrol last night, right?" I shook my head. "No, I was home." He frowned, hesitating. "Then who was in the North Watchtower?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. He said he saw me through the binoculars, standing by the railing just before dawn, watching the tree line. Said I waved to him. The next second, I was gone. The story spread quietly through the station. The kind of whisper people pretend not to believe, but avoid repeating after dark. I found myself eating alone, sleeping in shifts. They stopped asking me to join patrols. I think they were scared I'd start talking about the cave again, but the forest wasn't done with me. It started with the smell. That same damp, metallic tang would drift through the cabin without warning. I'd wake in the night with my heart racing, knowing something was nearby. Then the knocks returned. Always 3, always from beneath the floor. One night the knocks came closer, moving across the boards toward my bed. I sat up, gun drawn, and the noise stopped. For a long minute, I listened to the quiet, every muscle locked. Then I heard it, breathing. Slow, heavy, inches from my ear. I spun around, nothing there, just the faint condensation of my own breath hanging in the cold air. But there was something else, another cloud, rising and falling in perfect sync beside it. I left the cabin before dawn and drove until the trees thinned. I told myself I'd quit, that I'd leave this place, hand in my badge, disappear into some small town where the only thing that howled was the wind through alleyways. But when I reached the highway, I stopped. The sign ahead said, "Welcome to Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest." I looked in the rearview mirror. Behind me, the same sign. I turned around, drove the other way. The sign appeared again. That's when I realized whatever had come from that cave, it wasn't bound by distance. It was carrying me in circles, keeping me close. I went back to the station one last time. The others avoided my eyes. Chief didn't even look up from his paperwork. "You're taking some personal time," he said. "You look like hell, Ward." "I found something out there," I told him. My voice sounded strange, hollow. "It's not the terrain. It's not the cave. It's..." He cut me off with a hand. "We've heard enough." When I reached for my badge, intending to hand it over, I froze. It wasn't there. Just the impression of where it had been pinned, the metal outline still pressed into the fabric. That night, the dreams returned. I was back in the cave, kneeling beside my own body again, but this time, the other me was awake. He reached out, fingers slick with that black, glistening residue, and pressed his hand against my chest. The cold sank through me like water. When I woke, the same mark was there. 5 dark streaks across my skin, almost like soot. By morning, the forest was humming again. Not just the wind, but something deeper under the ground, like a vibration moving through the soil. It followed me wherever I went. I started recording everything, my voice, the sounds outside the cabin, anything that might prove what was happening. But when I played the tapes back, my voice always ended before the sentence did, replaced by a second one that kept talking long after I'd stopped. The thing wearing my voice began visiting the other cabins. Harris told me he'd heard me knock on his door one night. When he opened it, I was standing there, drenched, eyes blank, smiling faintly. "You're off schedule," I told him. Then I walked into the forest and vanished. He showed up at my cabin the next morning, shaking. "I saw you," he said. "You look dead." I wanted to tell him the truth, but I wasn't sure anymore which version of me he'd seen. A storm hit that evening, hard, sudden, like the mountain was angry. The radio lines went down, the power cut. The whole valley went black except for lightning flashes illuminating the ridge. I sat by the window, gun on the table, lantern flickering, watching the tree line. Then I saw him. Another me, standing where the light from the lantern barely reached. The storm winds didn't move his coat. His face was expressionless, eyes too dark. He lifted his hand slowly and pointed toward the cave. I don't remember deciding to follow him, but I did. I walked barefoot through the snow, past the frozen creek, past the twisted trees that seemed to bend as I passed. He stayed always just ahead of me, leading me like a guide who knew I'd come eventually. By the time I reached the cave, the storm had quieted. The air was heavy, full of static. The rocks had been moved again, perfectly stacked, waiting for me. Inside, the walls pulsed with a faint light, almost organic, like veins beneath skin. The other me stood in the center, facing the dark. "What are you?" I whispered. He turned slowly. The face was mine, but older somehow, worn thin like bark. "You left me here," he said. "When you ran." "I didn't." "You did. The forest doesn't lose anyone. It divides them. Is that the one that leaves and the one that stays?" He stepped closer. The air between us felt alive, humming. "You don't belong outside anymore." My throat locked. "Then what am I?" "The echo," he said. The part the mountain remembered wrong. Something moved behind him, shapes in the dark, dozens of them, all human, all bearing faces that flickered like mine. Rangers, hikers, lost souls, all whispering in unison, their breath rising as one mist. The ground trembled, the ceiling pulsed. The air turned liquid, pulling at me, dragging me forward. I felt the pull deep in my chest, like my lungs wanted to join theirs. I don't remember escaping. Only the cold, the scream of wind as I broke through the tree line, the mountain rumbling behind me, collapsing or laughing, I couldn't tell which. Now I sit here, in this cabin, miles from anyone, listening to the knocks return each night. Sometimes the reflection in the window moves a heartbeat late. Sometimes it doesn't move at all. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I can feel the cave breathing through me. Maybe I'm still down there. Maybe this version of me is the one that stayed. But if you ever hike this forest, if you hear a ranger calling your name from the ridge, don't answer, because one of us might still be trying to find a way back. The days since then have drifted like smoke. I mark them by light now, not by clocks, by the way it moves through the trees, changing color as if remembering something I can't. I used to know where I ended and the forest began. Now that border is gone. My breath feels like mist stolen from the river. My thoughts come in echoes. Sometimes I wonder if I'm even thinking my own words anymore, or just repeating what the mountain wants me to say. The radio has been dead for weeks. Every now and then it crackles alive, whispering fragments of transmissions I don't recognize, ranger codes mixed with words that don't exist in any language I know. Once, in the static, I heard my own name whispered twice, followed by a long exhale. It sounded relieved, like whoever said it had finally found me. I haven't gone back to the cave, though I feel it calling. It's not a voice. It's a pressure. The air around here has a weight, like everything is leaning toward that ridge. When I close my eyes, I can see the shape of it. It's opening, breathing in rhythm with mine. A lung made of stone. I've tried to convince myself that what I saw wasn't real, that trauma, exhaustion, isolation, they can make a man see himself twice. But there's a part of me that knows better. The forest doesn't create illusions, it reveals what you've buried. Maybe that's what the cave is, a place where the buried parts of us come loose. A week ago, I woke to find the door wide open. Snow covered the floor in a clean, perfect rectangle, as if someone had cut the night out and left it inside my cabin. My footprints led to the threshold and stopped. On the railing, there was a single glove mine, but it was wet and warm and pulsing faintly, like something alive was inside it. That was the moment I knew this wasn't about the forest remembering me. It was about the forest replacing me. I started hiking during the day, trying to retrace what paths still made sense. The world looked the same, but the distances were wrong. Landmarks didn't match maps. I could see the tower on the ridge and walk toward it all morning, only for it to still be miles away by dusk. Once I saw smoke rising from the valley and hurried toward it, thinking maybe another ranger was out here. When I reached the clearing, there was a fire pit, but the ashes were still warm, and there were 2 mugs resting beside a single chair. One mug had my initials scratched into it. I left it untouched. That night, I dreamed of the old ranger cabin higher up the slope, the one they sealed off after the fire. I saw light glowing inside, flickering against the broken window. When I woke, the same light was shining faintly through my own walls, like it was seeping up from underground. I followed it at dawn. The trail wound steep, through fog thick enough to feel. The closer I got, the more the forest changed. The trees grew narrower, taller, bark stretched tight like skin over bone. The air smelled of rain, iron, and something ancient. When I reached the clearing, the cabin was there, blackened timbers, half-collapsed roof, but the light was still burning inside. Through the doorway, I saw myself again, not moving, not breathing, just sitting in the chair by the hearth that wasn't burning. My eyes were open, fixed on something I couldn't see. I should have run. I didn't. I stepped closer until the cold inside wrapped around me like fog. I could hear breathing, steady and rhythmic, coming from everywhere at once, the cabin, the floorboards, the forest. Then the other me blinked and smiled. I froze. My voice caught in my throat. He raised one hand slowly, palm upward, like he was inviting me to step forward. I don't know what stopped me, but something deep inside, a sliver of instinct, made me step back instead. His smile faded. For a second, his eyes filled with something like sadness. Then he said, "You'll come back. They all do." The cabin light died instantly, plunging everything into silence. I stumbled backward, hit the frozen ground, and when I looked up again, the cabin was gone. Just trees and snow. No footprints but mine. I walked for hours, maybe days. The sun never moved. Hunger stopped mattering. Thirst became background noise. When I finally saw my cabin again, it felt smaller, like it had been built for someone else. I went inside, lit a fire, and sat down to write this, because I think it's important that someone knows what happens out here. There are stories buried under every ridge in this forest. The locals talk about them, though not out loud. Hunters who follow their own whistles, hikers who see their reflections walking the wrong way, missing rangers whose search parties come back claiming they saw them alive. We file the reports, we write unresolved in neat letters, and we pretend the ground isn't swallowing its memories whole. But I've seen what the forest does with its memories. It doesn't lose them. It splits them, reshapes them, makes them walk again. Maybe that's what we are, echoes left to keep the forest company. Tonight, the knocks have started again. 3, slow, patient. I don't even flinch anymore. There's comfort in it, in the pattern, the mountain's heartbeat. I can feel something changing in me. My thoughts come slower, my memories drift like fog. The fear is still there, but it's fading into something else. Acceptance, maybe. I used to believe my duty was to protect this forest. Now I understand it was the other way around. It's been protecting me, keeping me close, keeping all of us close. The snow outside is glowing again. The trees are leaning toward the ridge, bending like they're praying. I can hear a voice calling through the wind, mine, but softer, steadier, less afraid. It's singing that same lullaby from my mother. I think I'll follow it this time. If you find this log, if you're another ranger reading this, don't come looking for me. Seal the cave. Burn the maps. Forget this place. Because when you stand out there long enough, when you listen too hard, the forest starts listening back, and it will find your shape in the snow, your voice in the wind, your face in the dark, and when it does, it won't let you go. Not because it hates you, because it wants to remember you. I used to think I understood the forest, that after 17 years as a ranger, I'd learned its language, the way the wind spoke through pine needles, the scent that rolled in before rain, the subtle shifts in bird calls when something larger moved nearby. I believed the woods were honest, even when they were cruel. But now when I walk alone beneath these trees, I can't shake the feeling that something is listening. Something older than language itself. My name's Mark. I'm 41 years old, and I've worked in this park for almost 2 decades. It's somewhere in the northwest corner of the United States, bordered by miles of mountains and a lake that runs deep enough to swallow a town whole. I won't say the name of the park because what happened here doesn't belong to maps or reports. It belongs to the soil and to whatever is still moving beneath it. Most nights, I sleep in a small ranger cabin near the maintenance depot. The nearest town is 30 miles away, and when the generator's off, the silence here feels total, like the air itself is holding its breath. You'd think I'd be used to that kind of quiet. But silence isn't really silence in the woods. It's full of tiny betrayals. The scratch of bark beetles, the drip of condensation, the flutter of something that shouldn't be flying in the dark. It started in early October. The air had that metallic chill that means winter's waking up early and the elk were migrating lower. My team had been running routine inspections on the South Boundary Trail, a remote, seldom-used section that loops around the limestone ridge. I was checking erosion markers when I noticed a cluster of rocks that looked out of place, like the hillside had been rearranged by something other than weather. At first, I thought it was just a small landslide. The soil here is loose, a mix of clay and sand that shifts easily with rainfall. But there was something odd about the pattern of debris. The earth hadn't fallen downward. It looked like it had been pushed up. I crouched and ran my hand over the ridge. The dirt was warm. That didn't make sense. It had snowed the night before. I pressed my palm flat against the ground and felt a faint vibration, like the distant hum of machinery deep underground. I stood there for a long time, listening. The vibrations stopped and the woods fell into an unnatural stillness. Even the wind seemed to pause. That night, back at the cabin, I couldn't shake it. My radio buzzed intermittently, cutting in and out like it was picking up interference. The signal was fine during the day, but once the sun dropped behind the ridge, everything went wrong. Static, whispers of half words, sometimes rhythmic thuds that sounded like something knocking from far away. Around midnight, the noise came again. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, echoing through the wooden frame of the cabin. I thought it was just wind pressure against the door, but when I opened it, the air outside was still. The knocking stopped. I scanned the tree line with my flashlight. Nothing but the usual shapes: tall pines, dead branches, mist curling low to the ground. I told myself it was just the forest shifting. That's what we do as rangers, rationalize, because if you let your mind wander too far, the woods will take it from you. A few days later, I hiked back to the same area where I'd felt the vibration. The soil had cracked open more, revealing a narrow sinkhole no wider than my shoulders. I peered inside and saw darkness swallowing the light from my headlamp. The beam just disappeared, like the air inside wasn't empty but full of something that refused to reflect back. I called in a geologist from the district office. His name was Garrett, a quiet man with too much caffeine in his system and in a habit of talking to himself when he worked. He dropped a small sensor line into the hole, watching the readout flicker. "Could be thermal activity," he said, squinting at his tablet. "But the readings don't match. There's movement down there, like a current or pressure change." I asked him what kind of pressure. He didn't answer right away. He just frowned and said, "Like something's breathing." That night, I dreamed of the cave. I'd never been inside it, but my mind gave it form. A pulsing corridor of stone, walls slick like skin, air moving in slow, tidal breaths. I woke up drenched in sweat, the smell of earth thick in my nostrils, and a sound still echoing faintly in my ears. A low, dragging hum that rose and fell like the voice of the ground itself. The next morning, Garrett didn't show up to finish his survey. I radioed him several times. Nothing. His truck was still parked at the trailhead, door locked, coffee thermos half full on the passenger seat. I called dispatch, filed the missing person report, and started the search grid with 2 other rangers. We combed that ridge until dark. Nothing. No sign of him, not even footprints leading away from the site. When I returned to the cabin, I found dirt on my porch. Not just any dirt, the same clay mix from the sinkhole, still moist and packed in a perfect spiral, like something had been placed there. That's when I stopped believing this was just erosion. 2 nights later, I heard the knocking again. This time, it wasn't from the cabin. It was coming from beneath it. 3 slow thuds, then silence. I froze, listening, heart pounding. Then it came again, fainter this time, deeper. The vibration traveled up through the floorboards, through my boots, into my legs. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The ground under the porch was soft, too soft. I knelt and brushed away the top layer of dirt. My hand hit air. A void. I shined the light down and saw an opening, a narrow crawl space I swear hadn't been there before. The soil around it looked freshly disturbed, more as if something had tunneled upward and stopped just short of the surface. I couldn't make myself climb down. Not then. I just backed away slowly and sat on the porch until dawn, trying to convince myself I hadn't imagined it. When morning came, the hole was gone. Filled in. No trace. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not the supervisor, not the other rangers. Because saying it out loud would make it real, and I wasn't ready for that. But deep down, I knew something was wrong with this park, something that didn't fit into any report or environmental study. The animals were leaving. I'd never seen migration patterns like it. Deer, foxes, even the smaller mammals, all heading north, away from the ridge. Birds, too. I'd stand on the fire tower and watch entire flocks veer off course as if repelled by something unseen. Then came the smell. It was faint at first, drifting through the valleys, metallic like rusted iron mixed with soil after rain. But within days, it grew stronger. Visitors started reporting it too, asking if something had died nearby. The problem was the smell wasn't coming from decomposing animals. It was coming from the ground itself. Every instinct told me to stay away from that ridge. But I've never been good at listening to my instincts, especially when the forest starts whispering. That's what it felt like, whispering. Late at night, lying in bed, I'd hear it seeping through the walls, a sound that wasn't quite words but had the rhythm of speech. Long pauses, low tones, like something communicating just below the threshold of human hearing. I tried recording it once, left my field recorder running overnight near the porch. When I played it back the next morning, the audio was distorted, layers of static, faint moaning, and underneath it all, a slow, rhythmic beat. Not mechanical, not geological. It sounded organic, and it was moving closer. I stopped sleeping for more than an hour or two at a time. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd feel it, that slow, pulsing tremor rolling beneath the cabin, like a heartbeat echoing through the foundation. I started timing the intervals with my watch. 41 seconds apart, then 43, then 41 again. Always rhythmic, always steady. I told myself it was tectonic activity. That's what made sense. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more irrational everything became. Birds no longer sang near the ridge. Even the crickets had gone silent. It was as if the entire forest had fallen into a synchronized pause, waiting for something to surface. One evening, while reviewing the sound logs, I noticed something strange. The pulse beneath the cabin wasn't just noise, it carried a pattern, a repeated sequence of intervals and tones. I ran it through a spectrum analyzer just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. The result made my throat go dry. The waveform wasn't random. It looked structured, repetitive, almost like breathing mixed with speech. I leaned closer to the screen and increased the playback speed. Beneath the low frequencies, a faint harmonic appeared, a sound eerily similar to a human voice, dragging across octaves too deep for lungs to produce. Not a word, just a syllable, one that sounded like an inhale drawn backward. That night, I sat outside on the porch, staring at the stars through a haze of fog. The forest stretched out around me, vast and unknowable. Every tree seemed to tilt slightly toward the ridge, as if drawn to it. The wind had stopped completely. I could hear my own heartbeat, and beneath it, another one, deeper, older. That's when the radio came to life. The static burst so loud I nearly dropped my mug. I picked up the receiver and pressed it to my ear. Through the hiss, I heard something faint, a voice, distant and distorted. It wasn't the dispatch frequency. It sounded like Garrett. Don't follow it. Not a cave. Then silence. I called out, Garrett, can you hear me? Nothing, just the low drone of interference. My chest tightened. I didn't move for almost a minute, staring into the trees. Then, faintly, I saw a light between the trunks, a cold white flicker, like a headlamp swaying through the dark. I grabbed my flashlight and followed. The beam moved deeper into the woods, always just far enough ahead that I couldn't quite catch up. I kept calling his name, my voice swallowed by the mist. The forest felt wrong, the ground too soft, the air thick with that same metallic tang. Each step made the soil give slightly, as if I were walking on a thin crust over something hollow. The light vanished behind a cluster of cedar trees. When I reached them, it wasn't Garrett waiting there. It was a hole. Wider than before, perfectly circular, the earth around it sunken and smooth. A faint vibration rippled through the soil and warm air drifted upward. I knelt at the edge, my flashlight shaking in my hand. Something was moving below. It wasn't fast, just a slow, massive shift, like the turning of an unseen body. The ground bulged slightly, then settled, and with it came a sound. Not a growl, not a rumble, but something that felt alive. It was the sound of pressure, of movement restrained by distance. I whispered, Garrett? The response wasn't human. A whisper came up from the hole, dry, gravelly, sliding between words. It sounded like my own voice, twisted by echo. You're listening. I stumbled back, flashlight beam shaking wildly over the soil. The words had no mouth, no direction. They came from the ground itself. I turned and ran. By the time I reached the cabin, my lungs burned. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and backed into the corner like a terrified child. My heartbeat roared in my ears. Then, faintly, the sound came again. 3 deliberate knocks beneath the floor. The same pattern. Always the same. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every creak of wood made me flinch. Sometime before dawn, the vibrations stopped. The silence that followed was worse. The next day, I drove to the ranger station in town. I needed to tell someone, even if they thought I was losing my mind. But when I arrived, the building was empty. No vehicles, no staff, no radio chatter, just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the faint smell of ozone in the air. On the desk, someone had left a map pinned open, a detailed geological survey of the park. The southern ridge was marked with thick red circles, labeled subsurface anomaly. There were notations in the margins, written in Garrett's handwriting. Open quote, movement consistent with respiration. Not seismic, pattern indicates awareness. Expansion zone widening weekly. Close quote. I folded the map and left. I don't remember driving back. I just remember the way the road seemed to shift under the tires. A subtle undulation, like something deep below was turning in its sleep. That night, I made the mistake of walking back to the ridge. The stars were dim, blurred by thin clouds. My flashlight beam barely penetrated the mist. The smell hit me first, stronger than ever, a mix of wet iron and decay. The ground felt soft beneath my boots. Too soft. Then, without warning, the earth gave way. I fell through. The drop wasn't long, maybe 15 feet, but the air that rushed past me felt like it came from a cavern too vast to exist. My flashlight clattered beside me, spinning its beam across the walls. They were smooth, curved, and faintly wet. I picked up the light and turned slowly. The walls weren't rock anymore. They had texture, ridged and fibrous, like something grown rather than carved. Veins pulsed faintly beneath the surface, carrying a dull red glow. The hum I'd been hearing for weeks was deafening here, rolling through the chamber like the sound of an immense heartbeat. And then I saw them. Shapes embedded in the walls. Human shapes. Dozens of them. Some half-formed, some whole, as if they'd been pressed into the surface and absorbed. Their faces were stretched, mouths open in silent screams. One of them was Garrett. His eyes were closed, his hands still gripping the strap of his backpack, his body fused into the living stone. I staggered backward, gagging, my flashlight beam darting wildly. That's when I realized the floor wasn't solid either. It flexed slightly under my weight, like muscle tensing beneath skin. Something massive shifted below me. The chamber's pulse quickened. The walls rippled outward, and a deep guttural moan filled the air. I dropped the flashlight. It rolled away, its light flickering across the far wall, revealing a single vast fissure opening slowly, like a mouth yawning awake. The sound that came from it wasn't like anything I've ever heard. It was low but layered, carrying frequencies that seemed to vibrate inside my bones. I couldn't move. I could only stand there, trembling as the fissure widened and a wave of warm, damp air poured out, smelling of ancient soil and something else, something alive and rotting at the same time. A shape moved inside, massive, indistinct. It pressed against the fissure, stretching it wider. I heard stone cracking, the earth groaning as something forced its way upward. That was when the whisper came again, this time inside my head, clear and unmistakable. You found the heart. I ran. I don't remember climbing out. I don't remember the path back. I just remember stumbling through the forest, my flashlight gone, mud on my hands, my mind screaming. The tremors followed me all the way to the cabin. Now, even as I write this, I can feel the floor moving beneath my feet. The pulse has changed, faster now, stronger. The soil outside is cracked, breathing in shallow, uneven waves. The air smells like the inside of that cavern. And I know, deep down, that whatever I woke up down there, it's coming to the surface. I stopped sleeping for more than an hour or two at a time. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd feel it. That slow, pulsing tremor rolling beneath the cabin like a heartbeat echoing through the foundation. I started timing the intervals with my watch. 41 seconds apart, then 43, then 41 again. Always rhythmic, always steady. I told myself it was tectonic activity. That's what made sense. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more irrational everything became. Birds no longer sang near the ridge. Even the crickets had gone silent. It was as if the entire forest had fallen into a synchronized pause, waiting for something to surface. One evening, while reviewing the sound logs, I noticed something strange. The pulse beneath the cabin wasn't just noise, it carried a pattern, a repeated sequence of intervals and tones, I ran it through a spectrum analyzer just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. The result made my throat go dry. The waveform wasn't random. It looked structured, repetitive, almost like breathing mixed with speech. I leaned closer to the screen and increased the playback speed. Beneath the low frequencies, a faint harmonic appeared, a sound eerily similar to a human voice, dragging across octaves too deep for lungs to produce. Not a word, just a syllable, one that sounded like an inhale drawn backward. That night, I sat outside on the porch, staring at the stars through a haze of fog. The forest stretched out around me, vast and unknowable. Every tree seemed to tilt slightly toward the ridge, as if drawn to it. The wind had stopped completely. I could hear my own heartbeat, and beneath it, another one, deeper, older. That's when the radio came to life. The static burst so loud I nearly dropped my mug. I picked up the receiver and pressed it to my ear. Through the hiss, I heard something faint, a voice, distant and distorted. It wasn't the dispatch frequency. It sounded like Garrett. Don't follow it, not a cave. Then silence. I called out, "Garrett, can you hear me?" Nothing, just the low drone of interference. My chest tightened. I didn't move for almost a minute, staring into the trees. Then faintly, I saw a light between the trunks, a cold white flicker, like a headlamp swaying through the dark. I grabbed my flashlight and followed. The beam moved deeper into the woods, always just far enough ahead that I couldn't quite catch up. I kept calling his name, my voice swallowed by the mist. The forest felt wrong, the ground too soft, the air thick with that same metallic tang. Each step made the soil give slightly, as if I were walking on a thin crust over something hollow. The light vanished behind a cluster of cedar trees. When I reached them, it wasn't Garrett waiting there. It was a hole, wider than before, perfectly circular, the earth around it sunken and smooth. A faint vibration rippled through the soil and warm air drifted upward. I knelt at the edge, my flashlight shaking in my hand. Something was moving below. It wasn't fast, just a slow, massive shift like the turning of an unseen body. The ground bulged slightly, then settled, and with it came a sound. Not a growl, not a rumble, but something that felt alive. It was the sound of pressure, of movement restrained by distance. I whispered, "Garrett?" The response wasn't human. A whisper came up from the hole, dry, gravelly, sliding between words. It sounded like my own voice, twisted by echo. "You're listening." I stumbled back, flashlight beam shaking wildly over the soil. The words had no mouth, no direction. They came from the ground itself. I turned and ran. By the time I reached the cabin, my lungs burned. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and backed into the corner like a terrified child. My heartbeat roared in my ears. Then, faintly, the sound came again. 3 deliberate knocks beneath the floor. The same pattern. Always the same. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every creak of wood made me flinch. Sometime before dawn, the vibration stopped. The silence that followed was worse. The next day, I drove to the ranger station in town. I needed to tell someone, even if they thought I was losing my mind. But when I arrived, the building was empty. No vehicles, no staff, no radio chatter. Just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the faint smell of ozone in the air. On the desk, someone had left a map pinned open, a detailed geological survey of the park. The southern ridge was marked with thick red circles labeled subsurface anomaly. There were notations in the margins written in Garrett's handwriting, movement consistent with respiration. Not seismic. Pattern indicates awareness. Expansion zone widening weekly. I folded the map and left. I don't remember driving back. I just remember the way the road seemed to shift under the tires, a subtle undulation like something deep below was turning in its sleep. That night, I made the mistake of walking back to the ridge. The stars were dim, blurred by thin clouds. My flashlight beam barely penetrated the mist. The smell hit me first, stronger than ever, a mix of wet iron and decay. The ground felt soft beneath my boots, too soft. Then, without warning, the earth gave way. I fell through. The drop wasn't long, maybe 15 feet, but the air that rushed past me felt like it came from a cavern too vast to exist. My flashlight clattered beside me, spinning its beam across the walls. They were smooth, curved, and faintly wet. I picked up the light and turned slowly. The walls weren't rock anymore. They had texture, ridged and fibrous like something grown rather than carved. Veins pulsed faintly beneath the surface, carrying a dull red glow. The hum I'd been hearing for weeks was deafening here, rolling through the chamber like the sound of an immense heartbeat. And then I saw them. Shapes embedded in the walls, human shapes. Dozens of them. Some half-formed, some whole, as if they'd been pressed into the surface and absorbed. Their faces were stretched, mouths open in silent screams. One of them was Garrett. His eyes were closed, his hand still gripping the strap of his backpack, his body fused into the living stone. I staggered backward, gagging, my flashlight beam darting wildly. That's when I realized the floor wasn't solid either. It flexed slightly under my weight, like muscle tensing beneath skin. Something massive shifted below me. The chamber's pulse quickened. The walls rippled outward, and a deep, guttural moan filled the air. I dropped the flashlight. It rolled away, its light flickering across the far wall, revealing a single vast fissure opening slowly, like a mouth yawning awake. The sound that came from it wasn't like anything I've ever heard. It was low, but layered, carrying frequencies that seemed to vibrate inside my bones. I couldn't move. I could only stand there, trembling, as the fissure widened and a wave of warm, damp air poured out, smelling of ancient soil and something else, something alive and rotting at the same time. A shape moved inside. Massive, indistinct. It pressed against the fissure, stretching it wider. I heard stone cracking, the earth groaning as something forced its way upward. That was when the whisper came again, this time inside my head, clear and unmistakable. "You found the heart." I ran. I don't remember climbing out. I don't remember the path back. I just remember stumbling through the forest, my flashlight gone, mud on my hands, my mind screaming. The tremors followed me all the way to the cabin. Now, even as I write this, I can feel the floor moving beneath my feet. The pulse has changed. Faster now, stronger. The soil outside is cracked, breathing in shallow, uneven waves. The air smells like the inside of that cavern. And I know deep down that whatever I woke up down there, it's coming to the surface. I woke to the sound of the dishes rattling in the sink. It wasn't wind. The windows were shut tight, and outside the trees weren't moving. The vibration came from below again, rolling through the cabin like a slow, rising breath. I stood up, bare feet pressing into the wood floor, and felt it throb through the planks. The light fixture swayed slightly. The pulse had changed, faster, uneven. I stumbled to the window. The dawn light was dull, gray, thick with fog. A low haze clung to the tree line, and beyond that, something was different. The ground looked as if it had shifted overnight, shallow rises and dips where the soil had been flat the day before. When I stepped outside, the air hit me like the breath of an open grave, heavy, warm, and metallic. I walked toward the ridge, each step sinking a little deeper into the softening earth. In some places, the soil trembled visibly, small pebbles dancing with each pulse from below. Halfway there, I heard it again, that low, impossible sound. It wasn't underground anymore. It was around me. The trees creaked in time with it, their roots flexing slightly as though the forest itself were expanding and contracting. I knelt, pressed my hand into the dirt. It was moving under my palm, not shaking, not quivering, but breathing. Slow. Purposeful, and underneath it all came a deep groaning that wasn't quite sound. It felt like pressure building, like the land was holding something back. Then came the voices. They rose faintly through the soil, hundreds of them, whispering in unison. Some were high, thin, almost childlike. Others were low and guttural, layered with age. The language didn't exist, but my mind tried to shape it anyway. For a moment, I thought I heard my own name. Stretched, distorted, fading back into the hum. The radio crackled at my hip. Static hissed, then a voice slipped through. A woman's voice I didn't recognize. Calm but trembling. Open quote, "Ranger Station, this is Field Unit Delta 7. We have movement on the ridge. Are you?" Close quote. The signal cut. I tried to respond, but the transmission light flickered and died. My radio display went black. The batteries were new. It didn't matter. Whatever was happening out here was beyond signal, beyond technology, beyond reason. I could see the ridge now, the same limestone formation where it all began. The top had collapsed inward, creating a shallow crater that pulsed with fog. The ground around it was split in thin veins that stretched outward like cracks in glass. From within the fissures came light, faint, red, rhythmic, the heartbeat of the earth. I don't remember walking closer, but suddenly I was standing at the edge of the crater. The smell was unbearable. Hot, wet stone and iron. The fog curled upward in slow tendrils, and beneath it I saw movement, the faint ripple of something vast shifting beneath the surface, just out of sight. The sound changed then. It wasn't just vibration anymore, it was a tone, deep and resonant, so low it seemed to press against my chest. My ribs ached with it. I dropped to one knee, clutching the soil. The whispers rose again. Closer now, inside my head. You woke us. I looked around. There was no one there, just trees bending inwards slightly and branches trembling as if the forest itself were listening. You heard our breath. You followed it. You listened. The voice wasn't one. It was all of them. Countless, layered, old beyond measure. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. I could barely breathe. The fog swirled thicker around the crater's edge, and then I saw shapes moving within it, outlines of figures, tall and lean, emerging from the haze. They were human in shape, but not in motion. Their movements were too fluid, too synchronized, like shadows cast by something with too many limbs. The nearest one stopped a few feet away. The air rippled around it, bending light. For a second, I could see through it. A glimpse of the cavern walls, of Garrett's face, eyes open but empty. Then the figure spoke without sound. You carry it now. I didn't understand at first. Then I felt it. The vibration wasn't just under me anymore. It was in me. Every pulse matched my heartbeat exactly. Every breath I took echoed that same ancient rhythm. The ground shuddered violently. Trees cracked in the distance, roots tearing free. I stumbled back as the crater widened, soil sliding inward. For a moment, I thought the whole ridge would collapse. But it didn't. It opened. The land peeled back like a wound. The red light intensified, spilling upward in beams that pulsed with each low thrum, and from within that light came sound. Layers of tone that weren't mechanical or natural, but something between, like the earth was singing through stone. And that's when I saw it. Only for a second, through the haze, an immense coiled mass pressing against the open rock, larger than any cavern could hold. Its surface moved with slow, deliberate motion like muscle beneath translucent stone. Eyes, or what resembled them, opened along its side, glowing faintly in the red light. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots, falling hard. The forest floor rippled as though made of liquid. The entire ridge rose slightly, a single, colossal inhale, and then silence, total, absolute silence. The air felt hollow. Even the ringing in my ears stopped. The trees were motionless. The red light faded slowly back into darkness. I don't remember leaving. I just remember standing by my truck hours later, covered in mud, shaking, the sky bright with morning light. The earth was still again. No sound. No movement. For 3 days after, I didn't leave the cabin. The tremors stopped, the smell faded, and everything looked normal. Too normal. Birds returned, deer crossed the meadow again. The world pretended nothing had happened. But the heartbeat never left. It's inside me now. I can feel it when I'm still. A pulse beneath my ribs that isn't mine. Sometimes when I touch the ground, it quickens, like recognition. I've thought about leaving, but I can't. The park feels different now. Alive, watching. When the wind moves through the trees, I hear whispers in its rhythm, not words, but intent, the same intent that spoke from beneath the soil. Garrett's voice comes through the radio sometimes, not full sentences, just fragments, a breath, a syllable, the click of a mic turning on. I've tried to record it, but every file corrupts. Static, then silence. Maybe it's not him anymore. Maybe it's what became of him. Every night, I dream of the cavern, the walls moving, the faces shifting in the rock, the mound in the center beating like a heart. I wake with dirt under my nails and the smell of iron in the room. I've stopped trying to explain it. The land has a memory older than ours, older than time. Maybe we were never meant to live above it. Maybe we've just been sleeping on the skin of something vast, something ancient that's only now beginning to stir. When I close my eyes, I hear it breathing through the trees, slow, patient, waiting. And I know this much: it isn't angry, it isn't kind either. It just is. The forest doesn't belong to us. It never did. We were only ever walking on its back, waiting for it to remember we're here. Now it has. And somewhere deep below the park, beneath the ridges, the lakes, the trails where tourists laugh and take pictures, something ancient is still moving. It's listening. And sometimes, when the wind stops and the earth holds its breath, it knocks 3 times. Always 3. I left the park 3 weeks later. Or maybe I should say, I tried to. The resignation letter was short, handwritten, the way my old supervisor preferred. I told them I needed time, that I wasn't sleeping, that the tremors and the voices were symptoms of exhaustion. They didn't argue. They probably thought I was just another ranger who'd burned out in solitude, like so many before me. But the truth was simpler and heavier. I couldn't stand the silence anymore. Because silence wasn't silence. It was the heartbeat, always there, faint, steady, somewhere beneath the threshold of hearing. I drove out just after dawn. The road curved through valleys wrapped in fog, and for a while it felt like freedom. The park was behind me, its trees fading in the rearview mirror. The radio played nothing but static, but I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt distance. Then, somewhere past mile marker 72, the static broke. 3 low knocks came through the speakers. Slow, even. I pulled over. The road was empty. The pines rose tall and dark on either side, unmoving in the still air. I sat there for a long time listening, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. But when I looked down at my hands gripping the steering wheel, I realized they were trembling. Not with fear, but with rhythm. The same impossible rhythm that had haunted me since that morning at the crater. My pulse was no longer my own. I turned the engine off. For a long time, I just sat there in the silence, staring out across the fog-shrouded valley. And I realized something that made my stomach turn cold. I didn't want to go home. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't belong there anymore. Something happens when you feel the land breathe beneath you. When you stand over a heartbeat older than life and hear your own name echo in the soil. It changes the scale of what you think existence means. It strips away the small illusions that we're separate, that the earth is a stage built for us. We're not above it. We're not outside it. We are it, temporary patterns that move across its skin. For the rest of the day, I kept driving without direction. The road wound deeper into the woods, narrower and rougher, until eventually it wasn't a road at all, just dirt, roots, and silence. I parked where the trees swallowed the sky and stepped out. The air was thick, cool, and still. Every sound was distant, muffled, as if the forest were holding its breath. I knelt, pressed my palm into the soil. It was waiting. The pulse returned, soft, deep, steady. My heartbeat synced to it instantly. For a moment, there was no fear, no confusion, just connection. A strange, terrible peace. And then, for the first time, I understood what the voices had meant. You carry it now. They weren't a warning. They were a statement of fact. I'd taken something from that cavern, something unseen but living. And maybe it wasn't just in me. Maybe it was in us all. Maybe every time we dig, cut, burn, and build, it stirs a little more. I used to think the park was a refuge, wild but passive. But now I know better. It's aware. It's ancient, and it remembers. The tremors aren't random. They're a pulse, a signal, a breath in the dark. And one day, when the rhythm rises again, when the ground hums and the fog turns red, it won't stop. The land will wake. Not in anger, not in vengeance, but in continuation, in hunger. Because that's what life does. It moves, it grows, it takes back what was borrowed. I don't know how long I stayed there on the forest floor, hand pressed to the soil, heart beating in time with the earth. But when I finally stood up, something in me had gone quiet. Not peace, exactly, just understanding. You can't fear what you've accepted. That night, I camped by the edge of the ridge, what was left of it. The crater had filled in with rainwater, still and black like an unblinking eye. Fireflies moved along the surface, pulsing faintly in perfect time with the faint invisible beat beneath the ground. I sat there for hours, listening to the rhythm. Sometimes it slowed, sometimes it sped up. It felt alive, intentional, and for the first time I spoke aloud to it. "I understand," I whispered. "I won't forget." The water rippled once, as if in response. The wind rose slowly through the trees, carrying that same low hum, the voice of the earth, the one I'd mistaken for fear. It wasn't warning me anymore. It was welcoming me. I packed at sunrise. I left my badge on the cabin table, along with my field notes and my radio, though I knew it wouldn't matter. The park doesn't need evidence to remember. It keeps its own records, written in roots and bones and shifting stone. I live near the edge of the valley now. I still wake to the tremors sometimes. I still hear the knocks on quiet nights far off in the distance, rolling through the soil like the echo of a drum beat. But I don't run anymore. I sit and listen, because maybe that's all the land ever wanted, someone to listen. And if you ever find yourself camping deep in a national park, far from lights and roads, pay attention when the ground begins to hum beneath you. Don't mistake it for wind. Don't call it superstition. That's the sound of something ancient remembering itself. And if you hear 3 slow knocks in the stillness, don't answer. Just listen, because it's been listening to you far longer than you've been listening to it.